Forget the Clown Prince of Crime. All hail the Monarch of Menace. The two aren't actually conflated at all, but it's an interesting idea to play with. There are some truly unique aspects to this character, and while they may not lead to any kind of long-standing rivalry, they're still interesting and unique. So we're going to travel back to the Silver Age, as we often do on this channel. It's time to examine yet another obscure Batman baddie. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics. Get ready to kneel before the Monarch of Menace, or something. Firstly, we must set the scene a little bit, so we know exactly what was the Batman landscape that the Monarch emerged into. The character first appeared in Detective Comics 350 in 1966, which places this not only well into the Silver Age, but also under the editorial stewardship of Julius Schwartz, who had been brought on in 1964 to revitalize the Bat books. The year being 1967 means that the behind-the-scenes synergy between the comics and the Batman 66 TV series starring Adam West and Burt Ward, which would give a big boost to Batman comics and certain characters, was already underway. This being Detective Comics means that Batman is the main story, and at this time period there's one backup. At the time it was Elongated Man, who gets one of his most recognizable costumes in this issue, the red one. His wife Sue gives it to him for his birthday. As for the main story, that is written by Robert Kanigher, so you get to see what some of his work is like outside of Wonder Woman and his war stories. The pencils in this are by Sheldon Moldoff, and the inks Joe Giella. The cover is triptych-esque, showcasing Batman fighting this royal rogue, while he utilizes a variety of weapons in his arsenal. And they're all quite exciting, such as a lightning rod scepter, gas cape, and, though they don't label on the cover as such, but it's a hypnotic crown, a hypno crown. The panel on the far right is pretty memorable. The concept for this story is that there was a villain who bested Batman. It happened in his early days as a crime fighter, and he's not over it. Batman has been called the master detective, the king of crime fighters. Who's calling him that? But in the frankest confession ever made by any superhero in all the annals of comicdom, he reveals the startling identity of the only criminal who ever completely crushed him. I herewith dub thee Sir Fool, Batman, for thinking you could ever capture the Monarch of Menace. After a kerfuffle at the airport picking up Dick, Batman ends up having to stop some felons, and Dick ends up helping him, and then afterwards he compliments him, saying that he truly is the king. But Batman refutes this claim.
I hate to disappoint you, Dick, but when we get home, I'll tell you who really is the king.
Come, Robin, to the Shrine of Shame. Shortly at the mansion of Batman in his other identity of Bruce Wayne, millionaire sportsman.
In all honesty, Dick, I have to tell you that there is the real king, the Monarch of Menace, the king of crime, who defied every attempt I made to bring him to justice. I can still hear his taunting laughter as I caught him and his henchmen leaving the scene of one of his numerous bank robberies.
This one element really makes the Monarch of Menace stand out. How he's left this mark on Bruce that he can't shake. He's got this secret, hidden shame, and it's keeping him from feeling like he's the #1 crime fighter. It's interesting. The story is now going to try hard to sell it. The Monarch of Menace went all in with the themed henchmen, but they get a good cut. You'll see. Teach this masked churl he cannot approach my royal person without kneeling on bended knee. The Monarch of Menace, MM, is so over the top, it makes reading his lines quite enjoyable. And Batman also has his peritypical quips going as well.
The only court that interests me is the one I'm going to put you in, the court of law.
Oh, snap.
Do you really think you're going to catch me, peasant? There's an added layer of humor to Batman being called a peasant by this thief villain. I'm unsure if it's intentional or not, but if it is, well played. This is meant to be early in Batman's crime-fighting career, so he was unprepared for all the gimmickiness that was about to ensue. We have boots that releases super glue that holds him in place when he steps in it. We have a gas cloak. There's gas in there somewhere. We also have a rock and scepter.
The Monarch had a great sense of humor.
Hear that, Joker? Take notes. What's the matter, Batman? Is the shock of being knighted by my royal AC/DC scepter too much for one of your lowly stations?
Owie!
Finally, the Monarch of Menace hypnotizes him into submission with his crown. He then went on a crime spree that Batman was powerless to stop, with Bruce labeling him as the king of crime, and then one day he vanished without ever having had to pay for his crimes. And this defeat haunts Batman. He feels that he cannot be the king of crime fighters if there's this villain that got away from him, who he himself proclaimed as the king of crime. Do you think some nights he just comes down to the cave and broods in front of this painting? I think he does. Did he have that painting commissioned for brooding purposes? What was the explanation? I need a portrait of the king of crime. Now the story pivots to the Monarch of Menace, and does something you don't see very often in these types of stories. It presents us with a villain who is willing to quit while he's ahead. He stole enough to secure retirement of some kind, and now he's hanging out, enjoying it in this jungle-themed lair with his henchmen. They're living it up, riding that high. But MM is more than the successful villain. He's got layers. He's also a terrible father. His son is in his gang as the court jester. Look at him. As wretched a jester as he is a failure as my son. no more able to follow in my footsteps than if he had two left feet laced into one shoe put on backwards. The clown prince of fumblers. Batman must still be having nightmares of the time I completely crushed him. He'll never see me again. I'm just going to sit here laughing at him. And there's nothing he can do to lure me out again. You're the greatest and your son's the worst. It's just such a different energy to have from a Batman villain. I came, I saw, I conquered, you're not luring me back out. If only he'd been a loving, supportive, and encouraging father. Because years of belittling his son take their toll, and he decides that he will make his father proud of him. The Monarch of Menace is about to be taken down by daddy issues, which he himself caused. Meanwhile, time and time again, when Batman and Robin return from a successful sally against powerful criminals, it doesn't matter to Batman, the number of villains he's put behind bars is longer than a laundry list. All he can think of is the only one who beat him, the Monarch of Menace.
Sigh.
One night, when the Boy Wonder returns from a masquerade party, wait till Bruce hears I won a prize for impersonating myself. Maybe it'll take his mind off the Monarch. It's the Monarch of Menace. Guess retirement got too tame for him. Now, the Monarch of Menace may have been emotionally abusing his son to boost his own ego, but his son is also incompetent. Although that may be from the years of being beaten down. We'll never know. He forgot to wear the super glue shoes, so there's no sticky feet for anybody to step in. He trips over the big train, so there's no gas. And then Robin very easily dodges the scepter and knocks the crown off his head. He's just very swiftly dispatched at the Batcave shortly. Looks like you'll have to take a backseat to me from now on, Batman. I got the Monarch of Menace, the criminal kingpin who made you play second fiddle to him. Although, I have to admit, he was the worst fumbler I ever saw. He kept on forgetting to turn on his weapons. He practically captured himself.
That doesn't sound like the Monarch I met. It sounds like...
Yes, it's obvious. I'm an imposter. I'm the son of the Monarch of Menace. I thought I could follow in his footsteps, make him proud of me, so he wouldn't laugh at me, call me a fumbling fool. Robin's called me a fumbler too. Fumbling fool. Nice alliteration. Batman surmises that this boy just doesn't have any criminal inclinations, and that's why he's so bad at being a criminal. But more importantly, he now has a copy of the entire Monarch of Menace's arsenal. All his gadgets, and now he can devise counters to them. All that's left is a credible lure, and for that they're able to appeal to his vanity. MM snaps when he sees the paper says that the king of crime was captured by a teenager. He couldn't care less about his son, but his rep? No. And MM, the Monarch of Menace, has just been spending his time coasting. He wasn't ever intending to come back out, so he hasn't altered anything about his arsenal. He just expects what worked to work again. And it doesn't. Although admittedly, how Batman deflects the Hypno Crown is pretty weak, by holding a mirror. And so the King of Crime is defeated. Batman can sleep easy. He can move that picture from the corner of shame into the normal trophy room. The Monarch's son is in jail, but just wants to reform, and he says that he wants to be a crime fighter. He was so inspired by Batman, and finally, Batman is king. Well, Batman, now may I call you the king?
If you insist, Robin, go ahead. I love it.
Long live the king. You know, for how Atlantis and the Monarch of Menace is done up, this is a very solid story full of credible emotional stakes. The idea of Batman having the sting of failure from early in his career that haunts him, even if he's now successful, it rings true. And it reads even better as time has gone on and those obsessive traits in Batman's personality have become more and more foregrounded. The Monarch of Menace is unique in terms of being a criminal who knows when to get out, but also has a comparable flaw in pride that makes it believable when they manage to lure him back. Plus the layers of someone riding high on past glories not being prepared or equipped for a new era. It's interesting. You've got the disconnect between father and son that's paralleled and juxtaposed with Batman and Robin. Yes, it has super glue shoes and cape gas, but this was a fun story and a well-written and constructed one. It also nicely caps off the Monarch of Menace's story. You have no idea how hard I'm trying not to call him the Monarch of Madness. There were more openings left for his son than anything, but the original Monarch returns in the Bronze Age. This in Batman 336. This takes us to 1981. June cover date. This was the Paul Levitz era of Batman editors. This was actually his last issue before Dick Giordano takes over. And there's some nice editing here in terms of notes and the like. Not everything has a note, but there's some nice callbacks. The story here is called While the Bat's Away. The villains will play, I guess. It's written by Roy Thomas and Bob Rosagas. Roy Thomas also likes casting back in canon, so that's also why there's going to be some deep cuts in this story. The pencils are by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, who would just a year later be tasked with the creating of an entire style guide for DC. So creating the look Bible, essentially. Some of the looks which are still in place today, time of recording when it comes to merch or other things. The inks are by Frank McLaughlin, and the colors are by Adrian Roy. 1981 places this firmly in the Bronze Age, only a few years before Crisis on Infinite Earth, which would then launch the post-Crisis DC era. The Bronze Age was darker, with an eye towards more realistic realistic and emotionally driven stories. So it's always interesting to see how Silver Age villains translate when they do make the shift down. However, as noted, while his gimmicks were Silver Age, the Monarch of Menace has a more firm emotional grounding than most. So let's see how he updates. Sidebar, this story has been reprinted in Batman by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, and it looks great, but the digital recolorings are very bright, and they take away some of the brooding contrast and shadows from the original issue. There is a grit to the return of this character that isn't fully captured in the recolors, a brooding menace that I just wanted to highlight, because if you only see the updated recolor, it's not quite as present, whereas other things look better brighter, like the Spellbinder's psychedelic powers. It's just a difference in tech thing, and mileage will vary as to which look people prefer. I just wanted to bring it up because I do think it makes a bit of an impact on how the story lands. The original has a real Death Wish grimy feel to it. With all of that said, I personally like both, and it looks great either way. So let's take a look at the Monarch of Menace by royal decree. The comic opens with a crime wave and right out the gate with a more obscure Batman villain, the Bouncer, who bounces away with all of these diamonds, which is our segue into the fact that Batman is missing. It's been going on weeks, so we're now in presumed dead territory.
You can't really blame him, sir.
I don't blame the papers, I blame us. One man drops out of sight for a few weeks and suddenly we've got a major crime wave on our hands. We get a very smooth but not gimmicky segue between the police wondering if Batman is dead to using the same newspaper as a focal point to slowly reveal our villain, the Monarch of Menace, saying he isn't. He said instead that he has him captive and that he will keep him away from Gotham for a price. He wants Gotham's villains to pay him tribute, 10%, so tied to him. Based on the audience, you can see that it's largely obscure Silver Agers who have taken him up on this offer.
Still, it could have been anybody who got to him if he's really gone for good. Yes, it could have been anyone, my friend, but it wasn't. It was I, the Monarch of Menace. The Batman put me in prison once, editor's note, but now I am free again and hold him captive.
This is what makes this the first Monarch and not his son, because if it was his son, there'd probably have been a "and for my father" or some reference to it, especially because there's a note right there. The Monarch of Menace doesn't mention his son at all, which is very on brand for him. Here he is, having all these villains like they're his serfs. The thing is, Batman's not dead, nor is he in the Monarch of Menace's custody. He was off doing stuff. Blurry things, but he's back, and now he's got to sort all of this out.
Master Bruce, or perhaps I should say, the Batman.
Why was that so awkwardly phrased, Alfred? Like we don't know Bruce is Batman, or that Batman doesn't know he's Bruce. Side note, this issue is one of my favorite Batman issues, just full stop. We're gonna have to skip a lot of it because it doesn't necessarily pertain directly to the Monarch of Menace. It's very nicely broken up into bits of other villains committing crimes, as well as Bruce and Alfred's return. So the Monarch of Menace is a key orchestrator of a lot of the issue's events, but not foregrounded for most of it. I could talk about this issue for hours. The one thing I will indulge in that makes me laugh every single time is the Clue Master adding a sassy "apply yourself" to the clue he leaves for the police. Upon his return, Batman slowly begins to assert himself on the streets, which leads to one of the villains seeing that he's still around. And so he goes not to the other villains to reveal that the Monarch of Menace is tricking them, but to the Monarch of Menace himself to see if he can get in on the racket.
Verily, my friend, you are a true varlet of the first water. Big words. What do they mean, knave? That you are about to be knighted. Hey, take that pig sticker away from... Or perhaps I should say, knighted. Electricity. Since you will never again see the light of day. Now, let me see. I must plan.
It's after Batman takes down the Spellbinder in a very cool and trippy sequence. It gives him an entry point, because there's a meeting going on. The Monarch of Menace has decided that his spin is that he's gonna kill Batman, and they all need to cash him out.
It's not ammunition I want, Siraz, but money. After all, once Batman is dead, I have no hold over any of you, do I? You see, I've decided I must leave Gotham City for reasons of health. You all know how unhealthy the air is these days. But when I go, do I unleash the Batman again to prey upon you as you go about your nightly rounds, or...
Sold me, Monarch. Here's my part of the buyout.
My thanks, gentlemen.
But one person isn't in on this buyout, the Spellbinder. Because Batman couldn't just come in and bust this up. No, he had to dramatically dress up as the Spellbinder, including the classic staple of full mask over another mask. Let's go. We last saw this in Zodiac Master. Always entertaining.
Well, Monarch, why don't you explain to the boys how it is you're supposed to have me under lock and key? Yet here I am.
Cripes, it's him. Thankfully, criminals are a superstitious and cowardly lot, and so a lot of them flee, and Batman is able to take out the remainder and then follow the Monarch of Menace. He also then gives us the worst line of the entire issue, and I'm gonna share it with you.
Give it up, Monarch. You'll never make it in the underworld wearing those threads anyway. Burger King will sue you for trademark infringement.
It's okay. The paneling in their final battle makes up for it. It's really good. It's very dramatic. It makes them feel like they are truly classic villains clashing with one another. The Monarch knew that Batman was abroad, and so decided to use it to his advantage advantage, or run a scheme on the other criminals of Gotham, prove that he truly is the king.
By the time you returned, if you returned, I intended to relieve those fools out there of a king's ransom. Who knows? If you had perished abroad, I might even have found a way to take credit for your death.
Batman is prepared for his old tricks, but this time the Monarch of Menace wants to kill him with his bare hands.
Do you feel it, Batman? Do you feel the cold steel touch of death tightening around your windpipe? I trained long hours in prison for just such an eventuality as this, and I shall not fall.
Abruptly, the Dark Knight detective goes limp in the Monarch's strong hands. There's a training montage I want to see. Just hours of him squeezing those hand grips. The Monarch is so stunned by his seeming victory that he doesn't realize he's been faked out, and he gets taken out by the gas in his cloak. It's a tad unceremonious and anticlimactic, just like when he was defeated because of a mirror, and the issue ends with Batman being back. When it comes to tales of Silver Age villains returning, this one's great. It acknowledges what happened in the last one, links you up to it, but moves on from it. You don't need to know what happened in that first Silver Age issue to be able to enjoy this story. The Monarch's scheme is royal themed, on brand for his arrogant personality, but also clever. He is supposed to have been the king of crime. One of the ways that they sell this is by having him be seen amongst more B-tier villains. This works. It's a good issue to keep the other villains away. The story keeps him in the background and allows him to be more menacing because of it. And once more, he was planning to just be out. It was a good way to bring him back without feeling like a retread, and while acknowledging his more gimmicky aspects, it steered clear of them. It took him seriously and showcased him as a credible threat on his level. The villain roasting also comes from Batman himself, not from the story, so you can buy in, even if it's a man running around using words like churlish and varlet. It sells the idea also of how people in Gotham would have to deal with these criminals and take them seriously despite their over-the-top presentations. It peters out a bit for the Monarch of Menace by the end, but you can buy that he would have an axe to grind with Batman after the last time. And in general, if you don't know about that story, villains are always popping up being like, he put me in prison, now he must pay. Now, while some aspects of Batman's early lore tagged along to the post-Crisis era and beyond, the King of Crime, the first villain to best Batman, did not. Admittedly, while these two stories work well, his story was pretty much done, unless you wanted to do some kind of pure retread or update for the modern era, which is not what happened for him. You also had the chance to bring back his son, Justice from Monarch of Menace too. But that doesn't mean that he hasn't reappeared. He came back pretty late, many decades later, first appearing on the Rebirth Earth in Harley Quinn Villain of the Year special in late 2019, cover date February 2020, which came up when we discussed Mr. Camera. He was there too. This was an out of continuity, just for fun issue, where fans voted for their favorite villains in different categories. It was an awards show hosted by Harley. It was a very light-hearted but gory fourth wall breaking event. It was written by Mark Russell with art by Mike Norton, colors by Hi-Fi. He's in the crowd at a table with the Eraser. In his next Martin appearance, he has some lines. This was in Batman/Superman 22 in the story Little Boxes by Jean Luen Yang, with art by Paul Pelletier, inks Keith Champagne. The year 2021. This is a Mr. Mxyzptlk story, where he gives Calendar Man the ability to see that he is in a comic book down to the paneling. It's a fun issue in how it plays with that. There are lots of clever visual gags. The story is called Little Boxes, which is how they describe the paneling situation. And Calendar Man can now see these, and he wants revenge on Batman, who he quickly learns is Bruce Wayne. In his excitement, he runs to tell somebody. He goes to the Iceberg Lounge. This is where you find the Monarch of Menace sitting at the bar with Kite Man and Firefly. They don't believe him.
Didn't the internet debunk that theory already?
And how might you have come across that bit of information, Calendar Man? Calendar Man then starts going on about the boxes and transcending time and space, which does not help his case, and they laugh at him, and so he starts a bar fight. And the Monarch of Menace stomps him while calling him an unruly knave. I'm kind of concerned that Calendar Man used his powers to blind them. Look at that bottle placement and how jagged it was. But they colored it purple, so it's fine. You can't trick me. It's a good thing they undid pretty much everything at the end of this issue because they were blinded. Calendar Man, of course, loses these powers by issue's end. He ends up cutting his own arm off, and Batman and Superman have to help him cauterize it and wrap it all up. It was a poor revenge outing for him, but a decent Mr. Mixie story. And of course, by the end, he loses the knowledge of Batman's identity. Pretty fun issue, but Monarch of Menace is just there, and he's also just there in his next appearance. Lazarus Planet, Dark Fate. He's one of the many extra unhinged because of Lazarus Reign inmates Huntress walks past in The Huntress and Whisper of the Moth by Tim Seeley, pencils Waldemar Rivas, who is inking himself with Ivan Placencia on colors. Lazarus Planet directly followed Dark Crisis and preceded Dawn of DC. Some character status quos and motivations were shifted, and others returned to a more classic base. And some characters popped up and they did nothing with them. Remember that guy that they were hinting at was going to be a love interest for John, and then just nothing happened with him. I remember him. I supported that. Anyone but Jay. For Monarch of Menace, he's just a reference / Easter egg of, hey, remember Monarch of Menace? Yes, I do, Tim Seeley. Yes, I do. And this issue, it doesn't talk smack about him. It doesn't give the full breadth of how interesting he is, and it doesn't make fun of him or say he's not worth looking at, like the Zodiac Master. So hey, yay, because he's a solid, unique villain, even if he only had 2 full stories. The Monarch of Menace. Files say he was one of the first criminals to best Batman, but he was strictly a jewel thief, considering violence beneath his royal station. Odorant dumb metuant. Like Zodiac Master, I'm not entirely sure why he's in Arkham. He has a gimmick, yes, but it was never quite clear if he truly thought he was a king or was just playing with that motif and really enjoying it. I'm not sure he actually thought people were peasants or if he was just really in character. Maybe he went to a Renaissance fair once and he had too good a time. I also don't know why he's yelling in Latin. What he's saying is a quote from Lucius Accius. It means, let them hate me so long as they fear me. Lucius Accius was a poet and playwright. He specialized in tragedy, although that's a modern interpretation based on titles and excerpts of his work. A more contemporary scholar of his time period back in the Roman era described him as an erotic poet, although in terms of eros at the time, it may have meant a bit more romance and less what erotic came to mean over time. This line was also Caligula's motto, so it's kind of intense for the Monarch of Menace to be saying it. He's also fashioned himself clearly off of an English or European king, not a Roman emperor, but the point is, there he is, gaze upon him. Now, as always, time of recording, because these are forever stories and maybe he's back, menacing another day. But time of recording, that's how things stand for the Monarch of Menace. He's in its, hey, that's a character you might recognize period of his history. And it makes sense. The Monarch of Menace does feel a bit like a harder sell time of recording. To me anyways. Maybe you have lots of ideas, and if so, I want to hear them. What's really cool about Monarch of Menace is how unique he was, and he did have a decent amount of depth to him, and it does come off as a bit of a surprise given the look that comes across like one of the more outlandish but most likely forgettable villains. Instead, you get a clever, prideful villain with a motif that manages to work without going over the top. It is a bit over the top in his first outing, but it has some strong backing and foundation there as well. The second outing shows a refined version. It's reined in, and even the first had a little mini father-son epic, courtesy of Kanigher, who, it's always fascinating reading Kanigher's non-Wonder Woman things. As soon as he doesn't have to write women or what he assumes women's issues are, it's like he's a different writer. I always have a lot of fun with the Monarch of Menace, dethroned as he has become. Who is the king of crime? Is it actually the prince? Share your thoughts down below. Those are mine, and now I want to hear yours. Would you want the Monarch of Menace to return? Thanks so much for taking this time to spend discussing comics with me. Do all of the things, the liking, the sharing, the commenting, the hitting the bell notification, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.